Welcome. Welcome to our Candela preview. My name is Regie Cabico, and I am so excited to have a phenomenal poet who I have had the pleasure of watching their career grow through Capturing Fire. Two-time Capturing Fire Slam champion Mia S. Willis is in the Zoom, rocking my Zoom square right now. Also excited because Mia S. Willis is going to be one of our featured poets at the first ever Candela Queer Literary Festival, sponsored by Reading Queer and Capturing Fire. If you don't know it, Reading Queer is a queer literary organization in Miami that nurtures queer writers. Capturing Fire is an international queer slam, also a publishing house. I have been in awe. We've never gotten a chance to speak because it's been at the Capturing Fire Festival, but I wanted to ask you how you got into the poetry slam and just how that all happened.
Well, I have always been on stage. I started as an actor, so I started performing other people's words probably around 12 or 13. And then as I got to high school and I started writing quite a lot, I started working with speech and debate events, and so memorizing 10 minutes of material and blocking and things like that. And so I really got kind of into poetry slam as a way to keep competing after I left high school. I got to college and I met the spoken word collective at East Carolina University, where I went to undergrad, and went to one open mic my freshman year and never left. Really kept writing and performing and growing with them for 4 years, and going to CUPC and beyond. And so I really started with the very small thing, which is, I learned a monologue years and years ago. And then now I am still essentially writing that monologue over and over in different poems today.
So going from a theater artist, public speaker, were you reading poems that informed your writing, or were you also just watching some of the spoken word that could have been online or could have been in your school?
For sure. I was watching a lot of spoken word starting out. I watched a lot of button poetry videos, Slamfind videos, right? Obviously, that's really what every younger poet aspires to, kind of before you figure out the pay model and that, things like that. But that is what every young poet aspires to, and so that's the kind of work that I was first exposed to. But then it was poets like Nikki Giovanni, like Patricia Smith, who were able to do such interesting things both on the page and in person that kind of served as my segue into the literary world and into kind of quote-unquote pagier poems. So I would say probably I started my first couple of years as an artist watching performers, watching people behind microphones and on stages, and then I realized that there is a new power to being able to have a reader read a poem in your voice. And have such a clearly cultivated perspective and voice that even if you're not present, the work is still clear and still alive. And so that's really how I moved from one medium to another across the spectrum.
So my question for you is, when you started, what were some of the themes that you started with, and what are some of the themes now that you're working with, especially during this upside down pandemic, police brutality, racial inequity? So that's the question. So I'm gonna rephrase it. And Sasha, will you do like a 3, 2, 1, go, and then you want me to beat, pause, and then speak the question?
Exactly. So we'll do it the same way. So I'll just count you down. Ready now? Start with 3, 2, 1, and go.
I know for myself that when I slammed, my queerness and my identity as a Filipino were really important because as a brown queer person, the experience or isn't out there. So I also knew that if you've got 3 minutes, what do you want to say? So my question for you is, what were your themes when you started in the slam, and what are the themes that you're thinking about now, especially during this pandemic, police brutality, racial inequities, and all the inequities that are in the forefront that's so global?
Absolutely. I started out, my first poems were epistolary poems. So they were poems to my sister Brandy. Brandy passed in 2012, and I was still in high school. She was an epileptic and had been rationing her seizure medication until she could afford another prescription because she didn't have insurance. And unfortunately, during that time, she had a seizure that ultimately took her life. And so my first poems were, letters to her, were essentially these missives that contained all these, no-nonsense lines, thoughts that I could only express to her, and sentiments that I felt could only really be appreciated by her kind of nuance and her perspective. And so my first poems were these angry, kind of emotional missives to someone who wasn't here. And as I kind of matured through life and the kind of world moved around me, obviously losing Michael Brown and Tamir Rice kind of as a college student and things like that, those poems became poems about queerness, poems about blackness, poems about joy, particularly in those identities. And ultimately, I just recently completed my first full-length poetry collection. I'm really, really excited about that. It is going through a name change right now, as all trans books are. So, I won't say that I can give a title right now, but I know that the collection is finished, and I'm really proud of it. It is an homage to my blackness, my queerness, and how my Gullah Geechee upbringing here in the South was integral in accepting myself. How I had to unlearn all of the colonial ways I had been taught to love my body. And so that book is something that's very near and dear to me that I recently finished. And I'm a communist. I am an anti-capitalist. I'm an anarcho-communist who is living in the time of an uprising. And so I could not be more excited. The urgency could not be more relevant. And so I have been rereading Lenin. I have been rereading Angela Davis. I have been rereading Fred Hampton. I have been sharpening my tools so that when the time comes, I am ready to take whatever action is demanded of me. Because one thing that is important to me to state to all of my students everywhere that I go is that my poetry doesn't change anyone's material conditions simply by being. It's not, it's not going to change the world simply by being in a book. I have to go out and do something. I have to live that message and embody that message through that direct action.
Terrific. We're going to close with one of your poems, but before we do that, I wanted to ask you about your experiences performing in Miami with Reading Queer and Capturing Fire, and what you might want to present this Friday, June 26th, the year 2020, at Paris is Still Burning, our kickoff at Candela.
Absolutely. I'm very excited about Candela. I have the utmost love and respect for both Reading Queer and for Capturing Fire. I have made impeccable friends in both places, experienced impeccable camaraderie, creativity in both places, and I really cannot wait to get around this queer, creative, emergent energy. It's so alive in such an important way that I'm so thankful to both you, Regie, and Sasha Sinclair for putting that space together for us at Capturing Fire, and obviously to Neil at Reading Queer as well for putting that space together. Both are so important, and I'm absolutely incendiary with the idea of Friday. There will be some funny poems, some poems about some funny happenings here in the South. and then some calls to action, because I think everybody needs to hear that right now too.
Absolutely. I would love to hear one of your poems, but I've got one more quick question for you. When the pandemic hit in March, I know that there was a fear, as someone who is in the schools, as someone who performs, that when everything is shut down, was there this fear, panic about how am I going to keep doing what I do in this time, and where will the world be? So I just wanted to just ask what you were thinking and what was going on at the time.
Yeah, I had the unique experience. I was on tour when the pandemic started. So I was in Seattle, actually, probably one of the most dangerous places to be at the start of the pandemic. And so I definitely was running through options kind of as I was journeying back to my side of the country here in Atlanta. And you're absolutely right. My agent and I had very fervent discussions about what the next year to 24 months looks like for us. And, you know, one thing that has always jumped out and has always been available is the idea of these virtual events. So I have done virtual college shows, a couple of virtual college shows already, that I'm really excited about. So it looks like for now we are going to keep things virtual. We're going to keep things on Zoom, but we are going to keep going because the kids do need it. Our high school kids need it. Our college kids need it. They need direction, and I'd love to give it to them in the form of this art.
Terrific. I hope that you'll grace us with a poem. I know that poems spark other poems, so I'm hoping that when people listen to this poem, they might respond to it. So if you want to tell us a little bit about what you'll share with us.
So this poem is one of the ones that I wrote while I was writing my full-length collection. It is an exploration of gender. I am an archaeologist and a linguist by education, and so the way that I make sense of complicated things is through taxonomy, through classifying them with taxonomy. So this poem is called A Descriptive Grammar About Gender. A. Boy, B-O-Y, and boy, B-O-I, are homophones, distinguishable only by their context. Example: police officer to my father. Where are you coming from, boy? Example: lover's hand to my cheek. Where are you coming from, boy? B. The sequence of sounds trans is both a prefix and adjective that appears before the word it describes. Example: the Swahili name for the transatlantic slave trade is the Maafa, the catastrophe. Example: there is no Swahili word for transgender. There was no need to name the sources of the salt in the seawater before the catastrophe. C. Femme, F-E-M-M-E, and femme, F-E-M, are homophones, distinguishable only by their context. Example: diamonds are a femme's best friend. Example: my thumb is a home for the bloodiest hands, for those eager to test their strength against the diamond and the rough that refuses to give her up. D. Lexical semantics demonstrate that body and gender are historically synonymous. Example: this is my body, which is given for you. Example: for my gender is true food.
Wow, that covers everything. You put all of civilization to now in one poem. I always say, if you could put your whole life in a 3-minute slam poem, that is a challenge. But you're putting all of our contextual history. Earlier today, I was in a queer salon, and it's sort of like the thing is, before capitalism, we were all queer. We had our land, we had the nature, and all of a sudden, as soon as people started to take and colonize, all of that is gone. We lost our queerness. And when the monotheistic religion started to emerge, we lost so much. And I think this time we are trying to get back to our queer selves.
Yeah.
Even if you don't think of yourselves as queer, I mean, we were worshiping pagan rituals and the planets before the monotheistic religious practice. So thank you for that beautiful poem and for that gift. Mia S. Willis is a poet who will be featured at Candela, sponsored by Reading Queer and Capturing Fire. Check them out this Friday night at 8 o'clock. If you go to Reading Queer or Capturing Fire Slam on Facebook, you'll find the links. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Reggie. It's awesome. A great time.